This is Subic Bay Freeport Zone in the Philippines. You may not think it now, but until the 1980s, it was America's largest Pacific naval base with deep enough water to berth aircraft carriers and with an enormous ship repair and logistics facility. In fact, it was known as the logistics backbone of the U.S. Pacific operations. Now it's quietly being revived, more than 30 years after it was closed down. When Ferdinand Marcos Jr. met Donald Trump this week for the first time, they were asked about a proposed Subic Bay ammunitions base. Watch Trump's response.
Yeah, it's very important. Otherwise, we wouldn't. We need ammunition. We're going to end up in a few months, we'll have more ammunition than any country has ever had. We're going to have more missiles than any country has ever had. We're going to have all the speedy missiles. We'll have the speedy ones, the slow ones, the accurate ones, the ones that are slightly less accurate. We have everything. But we will have more ammunition than any country has ever had. It's very important to me.
Why is such a hub key for the U.S. and the Philippines? And what does a revived Subic Bay mean for regional security and Taiwan in particular? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Yin Khvat. We will be covering Taiwan's mass recall next week after the results are out. But for today, joining us are Renato Cruz de Castro, MOFA Taiwan Fellow at National Zhengzhou University, also De La Salle University Department of International Studies Distinguished Professor, and Gemont Lalari, visiting researcher at the Institute of National Defense and Security Research here in Taiwan, also a retired U.S. Air Force Foreign Area Officer specializing in irregular warfare and missile defense. Renato, Gemont, welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, in a press conference in Washington, D.C., President Marcos explained that the concept from an ammo hub was not a recent development. Manila itself had such a proposal, which could generate 300 jobs in the pipeline starting last year. This is the program it falls under.
The United States is assisting the Philippines in what we call our self-reliance defense program, which is to allow us to be self-reliant and to be able to stand on our own 2 feet, whatever the circumstances that occur in the future. And that, the reason that we have encouraged more interaction with the United States is because it is, again, it is necessary. And it is not just with the United States. It is with all our neighboring countries and even countries as far afield as the Scandinavian countries, the EU. And so this is an ongoing process. And again, I will stress the point that we do this because we feel it is necessary.
On June 24th, a report by a U.S. House subcommittee noted the lack of a munitions hub in the region and suggested setting one up at the former U.S. Subic Bay base, instructing the Pentagon to study the feasibility. Now, according to the Manila Standard, the facility would enable the forward staging of ammunition stockpiles and the materials used to make ammunition, such as nitrocellulose, nitroglycerin and acid. Renato, let me come to you first. So we heard there what Marcos said. He said, I stress that we do this because we feel it's necessary. We're going to come to the Philippine side later on. Let's focus on the U.S. side. Trump said, this is very important to me. Why is it such a big deal for the U.S.?
Well, number one, of course, is possible preparation for, just in case you have a push comes to shove situation. What, of course, the Pentagon and the U.S. defense establishment realize in the light of the Russia-Ukraine war, you really have to build up your industrial base just in case you have to fight a modern industrial war. You use a lot of ammunitions, you use a lot of missiles, you have to prepare them. Plus, there's also recognition on the part of the United States Navy that its merchant fleet has basically declined. Because again, that's emphasized earlier that American shipyards do not anymore produce that much ships. That's of course needed by both the United States Navy and merchant fleet. So of course, there's necessary at least to build up your industrial facility to support a modern industrial war, just in case push comes to shove in the Indo-Pacific region.
You said push come to shove, you mean a Taiwan crisis?
Also South China Sea.
Right, okay.
And of course, even Senkaku, just in case.
Right, absolutely, East China Sea. So what message is China getting, Gemont, from this?
Well, I think they're getting several messages. One message is that their aggression against the Philippines is causing the Philippines to want to have supplies in case the PLA decides to make their presence more violent, as we saw last year when one of the Coast Guard from the Philippines members was hit and lost his thumb. So this is an anticipation of an aggressive China. And so what the message that China should receive is stop being aggressive. And if they did, maybe people in other countries in the region would stop worrying about their buildup of their military and their Coast Guard and their illegal activities in the Southeast Asian Sea, which we've seen numerous islands become military bases.
Yeah, Renato mentioned Ukraine, obviously, burning through that ammunition. Ammunition is very necessary. We heard what Donald Trump said. Where would the US be getting munitions in this area if it wasn't from the Philippines?
Well, there are several other locations, such as Japan, Guam, Marshall Islands, Saipan, Australia, Diego Garcia, and possibly even in Taiwan. There's talk about developing weapons storage facilities in Taiwan. However, one of the most important things that a military planner, especially a logistics planner, would be worried about is the accessibility of these munition sites during a conflict. For example, if there was something happening between the Philippines and Taiwan in that direction, then things coming from Japan might not be able to get there. Maybe the PLA Navy might be controlling the east side of the Philippines, and so any supplies coming from Guam or any other island is prevented. So the idea is you want to make a variety of places in case a variety of situations occur.
So to ensure the survivability.
Correct.
Renato, let's turn to the Philippines. So why is the Philippines keen to establish this? Let's go first to Sara Duterte. She's accusing Marcos of acting in the U.S. national interest rather than the Philippine national interest, and saying that the facility would make the Philippines a target. What does the Philippines get out of this?
Well, it was mentioned earlier by President Marcos about the self-reliant defense posture. This is, of course, linked to the Philippines' effort to shift away from internal security and, of course, look at the prospect of territorial, or what the euphemism term is, external defense, which is, of course, primarily directed at China. That's why in January 2024, the Secretary of National Defense announced the Comprehensive Archipelagic Defense Concept. So we have to basically build up the industrial base to support the Philippines' shift from internal security to external defense, from an army-centric military to one that is, of course, geared for naval warfare, drones, modern warfare. And we simply, the Philippine government, the armed forces of the Philippines simply need an industrial base. And of course, the best place is, of course, also ask the United States and other treaty allies to support the buildup of this industrial base. That's why when Secretary Hegseth visited Manila last April, part of the plan includes the development of an industrial blueprint to basically support, probably what we might call the military-industrial complex. That is, of course, necessary not only for the United States, but more importantly, for the defense of the Philippines. And this was, of course, no less emphasized by President Marcos. It's for our protection. It's not basically to agitate or basically trigger an escalation against China. We need it. We need an industrial base to support an independent defense posture.
And alongside, Guillemont, the self-reliance defense program, which is, the indigenous industrial base, what is it, though, that, if it's a joint, which it looks like it will be, a joint ammo hub, what does that mean in terms of the benefits for the Philippines? I mean, does it draw the U.S. deeper into helping, defend this ally, this treaty ally? Does it change rhetoric to action in terms of that mutual defense treaty from 1951?
Well, let's talk about the mutual defense treaty. Article 2 says the parties separately and jointly, by self-help and mutual aid, will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. So they're following up what the treaty says. It's been, maybe I would say it's been not an important factor in the last few decades because obviously many countries in the region didn't think that there was a threat, but the rising dominance of the PLA Navy and the Coast Guard and all the actions they're doing, especially around the Philippines, made the Philippine government and the United States government realize that they need to start getting things ready according to these articles of the Mutual Defense Treaty. So both of them have an interest in having a supply of arms. Now, my experience has been in Israel, where there are also U.S.-only ammunition storage sites and Israeli and joint. So I would assume that similarly in the Philippines, there would be Philippine-only storage sites, U.S. and joint type things. And I would say also that the United States is looking at other places, like, for example, Papua New Guinea has allowed the United States to set up 6 sites there as well. So it's not just the Philippines. They're looking at where places to put these kinds of ammunition, fuel. The entire region is being looked at for this kind of logistics challenge because the tyranny of distance is a problem for the United States to support any kind of military operation in the region. So these forward basing, they're not bases, they're forward storage sites are very important. And let's be clear, none of these are U.S. military bases. Subic Bay is not going to be a U.S. military base. It is only going to be a place where U.S. military will visit for a short period of time, then rotate in and out. And so it basically follows the constitution of the Philippine government that does not allow any permanent stationing of foreign military forces in the Philippines.
Right. Now, along with the proposed ammo hub, Subic Bay is already the site of several defense-related developments. In March this year, the Philippines military announced it would convert Grande and Chiquita Islands into military reservations. And a month later, the Marines announced a massive storage facility that, according to the U.S. Naval Institute, could mark the largest pre-positioning effort to date between Washington and Manila since 1992, when bases were shut down. Aguila Maintenance, Repair and Overhaul Hub is a privately owned U.S. shipyard, with South Korea's Hyundai Heavy Industries expected to start operations there, repairing Philippine frigates and corvettes as early as this year. Renato, let me come to you first. So these are some of the elements of this jigsaw. We are homing in on Subic Bay. When you put it all together, what is the bigger picture that you get at Subic Bay?
Well, to build up, to again provide support for the United States Navy. Again, of course, historically, Subic Naval Base has been a very important port for the 7th Fleet, when the 7th Fleet was still operating from Subic Naval Base. Unfortunately, of course, after the withdrawal of the United States Navy in 1992, they removed some of the facilities. More significantly, the dry docks. That was removed, of course, from Subic Naval Base. So we're slowly seeing, those facilities coming back, but not the United States Navy, but in form of a private company, Hyundai. I think during the Biden administration, the Secretary of the Navy went to South Korea and told Hyundai, we want your presence in the Philippines. And of course, that also serves the interest of the Philippine Navy, because most of the modern ships acquired by the Philippine Navy was, of course, built by Hyundai Heavy Industry. So it serves both U.S. and Philippine interests, given, if the United States would, of course, and other countries would, of course, develop Subic Bay as similar, but on a commercial basis, just like the good old days of Subic Naval Base before 1992.
The elements that we've listed out, as well as what Renato has told us, in terms of preparing for the worst case scenario, which is a Taiwan crisis, how do these parts add up for you?
Well, I would say that they are building up a redundancy so that whatever scenario the PLA presents to the first island chain, whether it's South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, even moving more south, it gives the U.S. military options in terms of conducting operations and not having to worry about the tyranny of distance. That's number one. Number two, I think it also, besides preparing for a conflict, it makes it also more complicated for the Chinese Communist Party's PLA, because now there are assumptions about how long it would take for the U.S. Navy to show up or the U.S. Air Force to show up, or to sustain themselves for a long period of time now becomes more difficult for them. And so they have to adjust their planning. And so this complicates their potential for success if they try to do anything. So it acts as a deterrence simply by building up these kinds of war reserves all over the Indo-Pacific region.
The U.S. is logistically prepared and ready to go,
right,
essentially. Renato, so let's take a look at why the Subic Bay location is particularly strategic. We have a map that we can show here. Talk us through the geography from that security point of view.
Okay, just to give you a background regarding why Subic Naval Base. Well, it began, of course, when the Philippines became a colony of the United States. Originally, the U.S. Navy was looking at Manila Bay, but the U.S. Army said no. No, so eventually, of course, the United States Navy looked at Subic Naval Base and they found a natural deep water port. And it's very secure. Of course, right now, the Philippines is being ravaged by typhoons, but that natural bay provides protection for ship. So eventually, of course, after the Second World War, the United States Navy really focused on developing Subic Naval Base. So that has been always the hub. Of course, it was very unfortunate that the Philippine Senate in September 1991 said, you know, we're not concurring to the Philippine-American Cooperation Treaty of 1992. So voila. So again, the location is primarily directive. Look at the position of the bay; it goes straight into the South China Sea. So that's it. And again, the fact that it's a natural deep water port.
Right. And no coincidence that Chinese spies were arrested.
Yes.
You know, gathering information about Subic Bay.
Plus, of course, another element regarding Subic Bay after it was vacated by the United States Navy, it's actually 85% underutilized. You know, I don't think the Constitution would allow the return of American forces on, you know, the same way as when they operated Clark and Subic Naval Base during the, you know, before 1992. They're happening on a commercial basis. The United States Navy, the United States Marine Corps is interacting with the Subic Bay Authority, not with the Philippine government. So all interactions are on a commercial basis.
Right. So nevertheless, Gemon, what is the strategic or symbolic, you know, significance of the U.S. investing in Subic Bay after, you know, 3 decades of leaving it where it was a U.S. base? Can we say that the U.S. is returning to Subic?
Yes, but not 100% as it was before. As Renato mentioned, the Senate of the Philippine government asked the U.S. military to leave, and they left. Let's recall that the U.S. administered the Philippines as a colonial territory from 1898 to 1946, but prior to that, 300 years of Spanish rule. There are over 4 million Filipino Americans that have been in the U.S. military. So there's a lot of Filipino-American close relationships. So this kind of close relationship reinvigorates that bond that the Philippines and the United States have, which not many other countries in the world have, by the way. These troops that are coming are under either the Visiting Forces Agreement, VFA, or under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, both approved by the Senate. So that's the way that the Constitution was allowed these kinds of agreements to occur. But they don't create permanent bases. So in effect, they're coming back, but under the new rubric of the Philippine Constitution and the needs of the Philippine government and the needs of the U.S. government.
Does it represent a reversal of the decline of those U.S. ties, U.S.-Philippine ties, Renato, you know, which happened in the 1980s? Is it absolute confirmation?
Of course, what happened after 1991 was the end of the Cold War. Suddenly, the calculation was gone. That, you know, Subic and Clark Air Base was primarily directed at Soviet military presence at Cam Ranh Bay. Those were the days of the Cold War when I was still a young researcher at the Foreign Service Institute, and we will be doing our research in Clark, where you have, of course, the 13th Air Force and Subic Naval Base. Those days suddenly disappeared when the Soviet Union, of course, imploded. And of course, at that time, China was not yet a power to reckon with. The only time people in the Philippines realized that, oh my goodness, you have a big dragon knocking on our door, was when the Mischief Reef incident happened in 1995. That was, of course, the beginning then when the Ramos administration realized, oh, I think we made a mistake in telling the Americans to leave Subic in September 1991. So eventually you have the status of forces, as mentioned by, when visiting force agreement was negotiated and eventually ratified by the Philippine Senate in 1999. Then, of course, going to 2014, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. But again, there's also a possibility of a return of a Subic Clark Air Base style, because actually the Constitution does not prohibit. The Philippine Constitution provides a caveat. If the majority or 2/3 of the Philippine senators would concur to another agreement, then you could have the return of American forces under the same framework as the Military Bases Agreement of 1947. But again, this is a political challenge for any Philippine president. If he wanted basically to return back to the situation where you have, at a given point in time when Clark and Subic were in the Philippines, you have about 60,000 American troops on Philippine soil at a given point in time before November 1992.
Which is more than, how many troops in Japan at the moment?
I think around 50,000.
Right, so more than that. Gemont, so what does it say about the strength of the U.S.-Philippine alliance?
I think there are, as Renato mentioned, there are some very clear threats rising, and especially the last few years, the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine people have been suffering from the aggression by the Chinese Coast Guard, the Chinese Navy, all these different activities. And, since the 2016 decision by The Hague that the region that the Chinese have occupied, those islands, is illegal, it's only gotten worse. And so I think whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, everybody realizes that the Philippines and the United States need to work together to enhance the alliance. Now, specifically, as President Marcos said, these are decisions made by the Philippines based on their own environment. It's not the Americans telling them, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. No, the Philippine government understands what the threat is. They live next door to it.
Yeah, and perhaps they wouldn't be making these decisions. He wouldn't be spending that money if China wasn't threatening the West Philippine Sea, the South China Sea.
Or again, the lesson we learned after 6 years of the Duterte administration, whether you appease or challenge China, you just get the same result, subjugation. So might as well challenge China.
Right.
You also maintain your sovereignty.
Yeah, and dignity, of course. Not becoming a tributary state of the Middle Kingdom.
Right. So related to that, here's Marcos in the White House speaking about the Philippine-U.S. bilateral relationship.
Considering the context in which we live these days, especially in my part of the world, this has evolved into as important a relationship as is possible to have.
And let's hear from U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who Marcos met with before Trump. Take a look.
Your personal leadership is vital to advancing a secure, prosperous, and sovereign Asia-Pacific. I want to thank you, Mr. President, thank you both for your shared vision that includes leading with courage and determination. Our storied alliance has never been stronger or more essential than it is today. And together we remain committed to the Mutual Defense Treaty. And this pact extends to armed attacks on our armed forces, aircraft, or public vessels, including our Coast Guards, anywhere in the Pacific, including the South China Sea.
Okay, Mark, so we heard there Hegseth praise Marcos's courage, his leadership. Marcos said, this is as important a relationship as it's possible to have. And Trump also said they are a very important nation militarily. How would you compare the bilateral relationship now compared to when Marcos went there in 2023 to meet Biden. And also he had just opened up the 4 extra EDCA sites to the U.S.
The important thing here is that the Trump administration is building up upon the previous administration's efforts to reinvigorate the U.S.-Philippine relationship. The Philippines, as I mentioned before, have taken their sovereignty seriously and refused to be bullied by the CCP's efforts, both at sea and on land, and also cyber attacks, espionage, criminal activity, diplomatic warfare, economic warfare, the whole spectrum.
Hybrid of, yeah.
Yeah, the whole spectrum. And it's full on against the Philippines. It's not just in the military dimension. Khvat met with his counterpart, the Philippine defense minister, 3 times in the last 7 months. In Manila, before Balikatan in 2025, this year, Singapore during the Shangri-La conference, and again in the Pentagon just recently. And also, a very interesting thing happened that I wanted to point out is that the Philippine defense minister mentioned that he agreed with the concept proposed by Japan of one theater.
Yep.
Okay, so that's real important. And that one theater is the East China Sea, the South China Sea, although I like to call it the Southeast Asian Sea. And also the Australian Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense also agreed with this concept. I believe eventually, if China continues to be aggressive, it'll force the countries that don't want to be under their rule to unify. It's as simple as that. If China stops being aggressive and becomes quiet again, then maybe these countries would care less about building up their military.
We have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much to Renato Cruz de Castro and Guimart Nalari for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.